Welcome back. Panelists here. Pat McCrory, former Republican governor of North Carolina, now a current radio talk show host on WBT in Charlotte. Former Democratic Congresswoman Donna Edwards of Maryland. NBC News White House correspondent Kristen Welker. And New York Times columnist David Brooks. David, where do you go from here? Donald Trump, Omarosa?
You know, everybody's dirty here. That's what strikes me. It's the snake pit in the White House. As she said, everybody's lying to each other, everybody behaving kind of despicably, taking your colleagues, firing people in whatever manner, Trump delegating. It's just a lowering thing to hear about the way this White House works. We've heard it over and over again. And to me, the dangerous thing, it's all intermixed with the most sensitive subject in American history, which is race. And so you combine poisonous politics with racial bigotry and racial unfairness, and it could get very ugly. If this tape exists and it comes out in October, that will put race right in the middle of the election in a very explosive way. And the one thing I take away from all this is a lot of my friends are Trump supporters, and they say, you know, I don't pay attention to all that nonsense. I like some of the policies. Well, nobody remembers where George Wallace stood on tax reform. That's what matters.
Kristen, was that familiar? Was her descriptions of her time in the White House and what you've seen in the book, was it familiar?
Well, it was, and a couple of things struck me. One, I go back to some of the early days, the tensions that existed between Omarosa and some of the top officials there who felt as though she overpromised and underdelivered. She would push that back on that assessment. But she said something that really struck me, which is that once she left, there's really been no one who's replaced her. I spent the weekend on the phone with a number of officials trying to say, well, who is now the point person for the African-American community? Who is directing this outreach? And there is no name. They say, hey, wait a minute, look at the policies. The African-American unemployment has come down. We're working on prison reform, and we're coordinating with leaders within the community on that. But again, Chuck, there's no one in the White House who's really taking the charge. And I think that's going to be increasingly a problem for them.
Governor, you spent a lot of time on talk radio, so you hear probably from the Trump base. How are they going to react to this?
I don't think they're going to trust her. I don't trust her. Being a former governor and former mayor, I wouldn't trust anyone whose secret were recorded to the chief of staff and other employees, which we don't know how many other employees during their tenure in the White House. It's a very unprofessional thing to do. It's extremely unethical in any work environment, from journalism to business to politics. And I think doing that is terrible. And I might add that I thought...
Where do you think she learned it from, though? Could it be, is she right, that it's, you know, and you're in a cesspool top down and that everything goes?
The cesspool you didn't hear from the chief of staff. The chief of staff handled that extremely professionally. My chief of staff, when I was governor, who was African-American, fired people on my behalf, and they took them out of the office. You do this in all work environments. You do this in all work environments, and if you've been to the West Wing, it's a very small West Wing. There are not many rooms to go to, and the Situation Room is probably a good room to go to. By the way, I'd recommend the White House hire Thomas Stiff, my former chief of staff. He'd be excellent in representing not just the minority community, but be an excellent communicator for the White House.
Donna, how's the African-American community going to react to her? And the questions like, you're here now.
Well, I think it's a mixed bag because she knew about Donald Trump from housing discrimination to the Central Park Five to the Mexicans as rapists to Charlottesville. I mean, the list is birtherism. The list is so long. And so there's nothing that I think African Americans are going to take from that and say, well, you know, why is this your, you know, sort of come to reality moment? Many of us knew those things about Donald Trump before, and we're not surprised to hear them. And we don't understand, I don't understand why she's surprised either.
Look, we got these protests that are coming today. We don't know if they're going to create a Charlottesville-like atmosphere. Here's how the president tweeted about it yesterday. The riots in Charlottesville a year ago resulted in senseless death and division. We must come together as a nation. I condemn all types of racism and acts of violence. Peace to all Americans. Twitter, is this the way to bring America together?
Well, he's just distancing. I mean, you can say this group I find abhorrent, but it's always distanced. And so that's just a way of signaling to his people, hey, I'm still, don't get mad at me, I'm still sort of on your side. And to me, the most disturbing thing about all this and the way this march or whatever it's going to be today is happening, the way Trump leads the country right now, we're going through a big debate, a big transition, which we should have a debate about. In 2 years, the majority of children in America will be non-white. In 20 years after that, the majority of the country will be non-white. So that's a big transition. We can have a debate about that. I happen to think it's a very good thing. But we can have a debate about that and what immigration is doing to the country as long as bigotry is so present.
Can you have this debate on demographic changes without it turning racial, Governor McCrory?
I think some people wanted to turn it racial, the left and the right, because the fringes benefit from those types of debate. People like seeing a car wreck, but I don't like these fringe groups. I wish the president would call out the Nazis more instead of a more general statement.
He called out NFL players protesting.
Well,
he didn't call out the white supremacists this
well,
week.
listen,
Why not do?
I mean, the president has
I
a
know,
problem with
well,
race.
first of all, let me say this.
sorry.
The NFL players, there's controversy with them, and it's not just racial. Jim Brown disagrees. Jim Brown, one of the greatest, not only football players, but civil rights activists who made courageous stance as a famous athlete and actor at the time. He even disagrees with that process. So we've got to be careful talking about policy versus race, and where is that gray area between the two?
I think
Sorry, Don. I don't know.
Well, no, I mean, I was just going to say, I think that, you know, for many of us, it's really difficult actually to separate policy from race because our lives every day about the intersection of policy and race. And the fact is that the President of the United States today could say, no, I don't think it's acceptable for white supremacists and white nationalists to be outside of the White House, and he hasn't done that. And to me, those non-words speak more clearly than anything else.
Well, to your point, not only is he not doing that, he's tweeting about the NFL players. And a lot of people are wondering, where's the forum at the White House to discuss this issue? He had one on guns, another critical issue that we're dealing with as a country. Why not invite these various groups to the White House and have a discussion about it? Instead, he's taking to Twitter and only spinning things up more.
Hey, NBC News fans, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down here, and then click on any of the videos over here to watch the latest interviews, show highlights, and digital exclusives. Thanks for watching.